Welcome to Gartner ThinkCast. I'm Karen Stokes-Lockhart. Today, we're talking all about AI value. You'll hear from a couple of our experts on how to approach not only extracting value, but also what value even means in this AI-centric world. First, Gartner expert Mary Mesaglio will update us on the three types of AI value: return on investment, return on employee, and return on the future, which she previously introduced in our Top of Mind video series back in the spring. After that, Gartner expert Rita Sallam will walk through a portion of her recent webinar, How CIOs Can Calculate Business Value and Costs for Generative AI Use Cases. She'll break down how the three types of AI value can be placed in the framework of defend, extend, and upend, and importantly, how productivity isn't the same as value. To start, here's Mary.
If I had to talk about the last 3 years in AI, I'd say that 2023 was the year of this shiny new thing. 2024 was the year of innovating all over the enterprise and letting 1,000 flowers bloom. And 2025 is the year of AI value. AI is actually following the Gartner hype cycle. 2023 was the initial boom. 2024, AI hit the peak of inflated expectations. And in 2025, we're headed for the trough. Executives ask me every day, where is the amazing value that AI was supposed to deliver? And they're getting impatient. Back in the spring, I did a top of mind video on how there are 3 types of AI value, and it's worth revisiting those now. The 3 types of AI value are return on investment, return on employee, and return on the future. In other words, AI is not just an ROI play. Return on employee is about individual employee productivity. This is you using AI to summarize a meeting or translate it into Spanish or Italian or whatever. Lots of executives are searching for the massive cost savings that they associate with increased productivity. And that has proved elusive for a few reasons. First of all, it turns out that productivity is one of the hardest things to measure and track. And second of all, time saved does not equal money saved because of something called productivity leakage. What that means is if I save 30 minutes in a day because of AI, what am I going to do with that time? Am I going to work harder? Or maybe go get a latte? I'm not going to answer that, and maybe you shouldn't either. But there is a return here. It's just not directly financial. So executives would be better off looking at employee engagement. It goes up when they use personal AI productivity tools. And of course, this has indirect financial benefits, but it's not going to result in some magical number. The second kind of AI value is indeed return on investment. And the first thing you need to know is that only focusing on productivity will not bring ROI. For that, it requires deep process change, integrating AI into your workflow. So this is an insurance company transforming their underwriting process using AI, or a bank changing their whole credit process using AI, or a manufacturing company using AI to change their track and trace process in their supply chain. The problem here is that companies are dabbling. They're sprinkling a little AI at the beginning or the end of the process and waiting for magical things to occur. And that's not how this works. You need deep process redesign, deep understanding of what AI can do and what it can't do, deep understanding of your data, and someone who's close to the work being done, who really understands it. The third kind of AI value is return on the future. Not all of you are going to pursue this kind of value because it's frankly risky and really high stakes. This is where you're using AI to rewrite the rules of your industry. So you're not getting better at playing the game, you're changing the game. Lots of executive leaders say they want this kind of game-changing innovation, and who wouldn't? It sounds super sexy. But in my experience with return on the future ideas, they're deeply unsexy and unglamorous in reality, because it's really hard to pursue a vision that nobody else can see. And in return on the future, you're failing most of the time. So you're asking for more money when the last round of money and investment hasn't paid off yet. So a lot of enterprises are going to opt out of return on the future, and that's just fine. The critical thing is not to opt out of what to watch for. What are others doing with AI in your industry? And do you need to be not a fast follower, but a super fast follower? So at a minimum, know when something's changed in your industry so at least you can react. So what kind of value should you pursue? The answer is to manage AI investments like a portfolio. So don't ask, should we give everybody a Copilot license? Do ask, how do we invest across these three categories? So to wrap it all up, what we're seeing with AI value follows our hype cycle projections. You want to revisit your ambitions, remember that productivity does not equal value, and consider the business outcomes of not just ROI, but also ROE and maybe ROF as well.
Hi, I'm Mary Mesaglio, a Vice President Distinguished Analyst at Gartner. I've led several sessions at many Gartner conferences through the years, and if there's one thing I can say about them, it's that attending them is the best way to stay ahead of the competition. Each conference I've been to provides attendees with invaluable insights and ideas, and the content is always relevant and tailored to key issues being faced by leaders in every core business, be it finance, HR, sales, IT, supply chain, or marketing. Join me at a Gartner conference to learn about emerging trends and gain new perspectives that you won't be able to find anywhere else. Leave our conferences ready to contribute more at work, and most importantly, be equipped with the skills to turn new ideas into action. Visit Gartner.com/conferences or the link in the description of this podcast to learn more.
Next up, Rita Sallam will walk through how to strategically assess the value of Gen AI use cases. Here's Rita.
Let's take a look now at our framework for helping you think about how you would assess value and cost. So conceptually, we find that use cases typically fall into three categories: sort of defensive use cases, where they're relatively easy to buy, relatively easy to deploy. You might get incremental task-specific or job-specific gains, maybe micro innovations. But because they're often general productivity type of benefits that are often difficult to nail down in hard financial terms, we see these types of use cases, coding assistance, productivity assistance, they generally result in a return on employee, but they still have to be managed to even realize those benefits. The next sort of category of use cases are the ones where you're extending an existing business process or an activity or decision. You're tying the Gen AI use case to that specific process improvement or decision improvement. And here we see better ability to define and identify value, and return on investment still has to be managed. But whereas the defensive use cases are more about productivity improvements that have to be converted into hard financial numbers, generally speaking, the extend use cases that are tied to a specific process or decision can be tied to a specific cost reduction or revenue increase. And so a little bit easier to get your hands around. And then the third category of use case that we'll talk about in more detail is those sort of upending types of investments where you're really trying to change your industry, create a new market, potentially new products and services. You're changing your core processes for a dramatic shift in the basis of competition in your industry. And those tend to have more strategic benefits, more strategic outcomes. And so we say that this is really about return on the future. Typically, you need to have a higher risk tolerance in your organization to invest in these types of use cases. Are typically more expensive. They take longer. There's a longer time to benefit. And so that's a framework that we'll use as we think about these use cases. And as I said, typically when we ask our clients, here's another survey on where the primary business focus is for their Gen AI initiatives, you can see it's really cost optimization. The vast majority is around revenue growth and revenue optimization. And to be honest, that's sometimes not always easy to connect your initiatives to those outcomes, particularly when we're talking about those defensive types of use cases where productivity improvement or time is the biggest benefit, because productivity isn't the same as value. If there's one thing I want you to leave with is that thought. We can create productivity all day long. If you give me an hour a day back, I might take 10 minutes of it and go have a cup of coffee. I might use some of that time to do things that I like to do versus activities that are optimal for the organization. And so we can create a benefit gain in terms of productivity, but we have to convert that time into something that's actually going to benefit the organization. And how do we make sure and enable people who are using these tools to take the time that they're getting back and use that time to sell more, to improve quality, to work with customers more so that we improve the experience and potentially reduce churn, potentially cross-sell new products, or that we use that time to potentially the employees is happier. And so they stay with the company and they churn less. So we lower our cost to hire. So we have to think about very proactively and intentionally, how do we harvest the time and convert that into something that's actually going to realize a business benefit that can be measured and ideally have a financial outcome potentially longer term. And that's the challenge. And we have this concept of productivity leak. Again, just because you give me an hour a day back, that's a theoretical value. I may, in the best of circumstances, to switch to another task, there'll be context switching. I may take some time to go collaborate with a colleague, which may be positive. There may be task coordination that has to be done, so you'll lose some time that way. And then there's the theory of constraints. Just because I optimize one piece of the process, maybe my part, if I don't optimize the rest of it, I'm still not going to get the full benefit of that productivity improvement in one part of the process. So now let's take a look at a little more detail. Okay, so we are going to, again, conceptually first now talk about cost. But I wanted to expand the defend, extend, upend concept framework to include the concept that these use cases have a specific value and competitive impact profile. And as you move along the continuum from defend to extend, upend, typically you have a different deployment model. And that deployment model typically is more complex. It involves more enterprise data. There's more upfront development, particularly more complex, potentially more complex model type of involvement. And so more risk as we move further to the right. So you'll see as we talk a bit about the cost elements, how that works out. So what I'm going to do right now is visualize the cost components for you. I think one of the biggest mistakes we see our clients make is when they think about cost, they focus on the model costs only. But we know, and this has been, I think, one of the challenges with our organizations, that the total cost of ownership is actually far greater for the other components beyond the model. And so I'll talk about what those components are. And so just focusing on the model side of it, unlike previous computing paradigms, we know that the process of training those models, running large language models, has high structural costs for vendors selling those models. So even large language models trained with billions of parameters, they continue to require massive computing power because they run billions of calculations on specialized GPU hardware in response to every prompt. But we do know that costs are trending down. Pricing models and techniques that lower costs are already evolving as the market matures. Even prior to the DeepSeek innovation, we saw that OpenAI lowered their prices several times. And they've introduced several model versions since the launch of ChatGPT in November of 2022. And we see innovations in engineering, in model techniques. Of course, DeepSeek being one of the most widely talked about and popular. But again, we've seen over time, over these past 2 years, going on 3 years, innovations that have brought the energy consumption, the compute, and then therefore the pricing, not sure in line with the cost to the vendors, and down. So the opportunities to reduce the cost of Gen AI initiatives at scale, they've expanded. And they've also changed the build versus buy deployment options for cost effectively transitioning from pilot to enterprise deployment. And so let's now just jump to the components. So again, the first piece of total cost is for any of these use cases, any of the defend, extended end use cases, is the upfront application development, integration, modifying systems type of cost. Whether even if you're just implementing coding assistance, you still have some upfront integration with your existing systems like Jira. You may have some upfront security and governance work that has to be done. So all the way up to more extensive or complex application development for a product or a custom application. So we have to factor those in. And as you go further up the continuum, you may need more expensive skills, more highly skilled people. So that has to factor in. Now, of course, if you are fine-tuning a model or you're pre-training your own custom model, you will have model costs. Fewer of our clients are doing that, although the price of fine-tuning has come way down by itself. And we'll talk about that when we get to that use case. Then you have the cost of compute and your AI technology infrastructure, the tools you need to build out either models or build out the components of your AI application. And so the cloud infrastructure, it can either be absorbed by your SaaS vendor or by your model vendor, but still you may have to pay cloud infrastructure for things like vector database storage, for your embeddings, if you are building a custom application. So you have that cost. Generally, if you host your own model, then you assume the full cost of inference and compute for the model. If you are taking, let's say, building an application using an open source, pre-trained open source model that you're hosting yourself, either in the cloud, then you would have those cloud infrastructure costs, or on premises, then you would have the hardware costs. Then an often underestimated cost is data. AI-ready data is necessary for Gen AI cost optimization. Poor data readiness, including semantics, can increase the amount of tokens you need for use case accuracy. So investments in enriching data via semantics can actually reduce the cost, the token cost for inference and training while achieving higher quality. AI agents will further increase the need for expanding and maturing your data management capability. Now, this is one area where I think business folks tend to underestimate because they hear the hype. Why can't I just take Gen AI and point it at my 12 instances of SAP and miraculously get accurate insights from it? Those of you who are in this and have been or data analytics leaders or CIOs with experience with data and analytics know that's just not the case. Even if you do a simple use case like analyzing your call transcripts, still you're going to want to strip out unnecessary text to minimize the text that you actually put into a prompt so that you can lower the cost and also get higher accuracy from your queries. But at the more extensive level, you need to apply different types of actions on your data, even if you may need a data fabric in place to orchestrate the data for different queries. So data management for AI, data engineering for AI-ready data become an important cost particularly as you move up the continuum to more complex applications. And then you might have user costs. Certainly, if you're buying a SaaS model license, via a SaaS model license, you'll have per user license costs. But another very often underestimated cost is training and business change management. If you're giving users tools without helping them think through how this changes how they work, how it changes the processes that you're trying to improve, if you are not teaching people how to use the tools responsibly from a governance perspective, you will not realize the value that you expect. We see this in our surveys over and over again, that one of the biggest challenges to realizing value is that users don't know how they use this new capability to actually change how they work. And so it looks like a small bucket, but in this iteration of our model, training and business change become a much more important and wildly underestimated cost. And then the final piece, one of the other major pieces, is the inference cost, right? So this is where you are leveraging either the model APIs of OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, et cetera, Amazon models, but you are paying by the amount of tokens or text that you put into the prompt and the amount of text that you get out. And that could be impacted by things like the number of iterations users do, the workload of the users, the number of users you have, how many times they use the system every day, how many iterations they do each time they ask a question, plus the sub API calls that you may need to do to get to the accuracy you need. And that relates back to how much have you invested in adding context to your data via semantics. You have to align your investments as a portfolio. How you invest in the percentage of investment that you make in Defend, Extend, Upend is really going to be based on your AI ambition as an organization. So that needs to be done. That kind of ambition has to be defined by your leadership. Do they want to disrupt their industry? Some industries investing in upending investments like pharma, that's actually a competitive requirement because most of the major players are investing in things like drug discovery and clinical trials processes. So a lot of this is going to be very industry specific, but you have to have an AI ambition as an organization within your industry, as your leadership has to determine that, and your portfolio should reflect that ambition. Again, how you realize value is critical. So you have to strategically plan to actively harvest, whether you are investing in Defend, Extend, Upend types of use cases. And again, what you need to think about is what's the right portfolio for you to realize your AI ambition, and how are you going to actively manage the costs and the value to realize the ROI and ultimately optimize the impact for your organization. So again, just to reiterate, measure and manage total costs, not just the cost of models and value, and do that from proof of concept. We see a lot of times organizations have done the proof of concept, they've thrown out these tools to their users and like, now we're being asked to justify the value to move on. No, that has to be done early on, how you're going to do that, whether you're looking at Defend, Extend, or Upend use cases. Don't underestimate the need to invest in AI-ready data, in governance and risk management, and really don't underestimate the need to invest in and manage business change. That will be the only way that you're going to be able to convert all of these potential theoretical benefits into actual business outcome and value.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of ThinkCast. That was Gartner Distinguished VP Analysts Mary Mesaglio and Rita Sallam. To learn more about this topic and register to join us at Gartner IT Symposium Expo, follow the links in the notes. ThinkCast will be back wherever you listen to podcasts a week from today. In the meantime, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with a colleague so neither of you will miss it.
ThinkCast is a production of Gartner. This podcast may not be reproduced or distributed in any form without Gartner's permission. It consists of the opinions of Gartner's research organization, which should not be construed as statements of fact. Content provided by other speakers is expressly the views of the speaker and/or their organization. While the information contained in this podcast has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, Gartner disclaims all warranties as to the accuracy, completeness, or adequacy of such information. Although Gartner research may address legal and financial issues, Gartner does not provide legal or investment advice, and its research should not be construed or used as such.